I'll be honest, I've really never been a big fan of Marvel projects, but even I recognize that Captain America Civil War is probably the most important comic book movie of all time. That's because if Civil War doesn't work, then Infinity War doesn't work, and if Infinity War doesn't work, then Endgame doesn't work, and all those projects over all those years and all that planning ultimately amounts to nothing. And I realize that for most people, Civil War really did work, and in turn so did Infinity War and Endgame, but I think that even those people can recognize that there are some very obvious flaws in this movie that could easily be fixed to make it more appreciated by even wider audiences. My issues with Civil War mainly stem from the Sokovia Accords being the main center conflict of this movie. I think that there's a much deeper personal conflict here that could be better utilized, and the Sokovia Accords really relies on just a failure to communicate as being a central conflict, something that The Last Jedi does as well, and I'm not a fan of it there either. This failure to communicate, too, isn't just a couple of people who can't talk something out. This is two superheroes, two of the greatest superheroes on Earth, who have been on a crime-fighting team together for years and years. I think that surely, if we look back on these characters over the years leading up to Civil War, we can imagine a world where they would be able to just talk this out without escalating this into an actual civil war between the greatest superheroes on Earth. My other big gripe with this movie is that Helmut Zemo doesn't really get the screen time that it requires to be a truly great villain in the MCU or in superhero movies in general. I know you might click off the video when I say this, but I truly believe that Jesse Eisenberg's version of Lex Luthor is just the better version of Helmut Zemo in, of course, Batman vs. Superman Ultimate Edition, not the original theatrical cut. In BVS Ultimate Edition, it feels like you really get to know Lex Luthor and see how he's able to manipulate these essentially infallible superheroes to start a war with each other. Helmut Zemo, on the other hand, only has 10 minutes of screen time in this 150-minute long movie. That is absurd. I wanted a lot more of him in this movie too, because I think he's one of the more interesting MCU villains just in the history of the franchise. So how would I fix this? I love the first little bit of this movie. The Sokovia incident feels raw and powerful and just so real. You get to see the Avengers lose, and that's really important for the rest of the Infinity Saga. This also creates Helmut Zemo, who I do think is the perfect villain for this movie. I also really appreciate the scene where Tony does get guilt-tripped, and I like the backstory with his parents' death as well. I want this first 15, 20, even 30 minutes of the movie to be similar to Endgame. I want to see our superheroes grieving this loss and thinking of what they could have done better to prevent this horrible incident. Civil War is a pretty dense movie when you really get down to it, and there's not a lot of room for humor in this, even in the original cut. During this sort of mourning period, I think that's the perfect time to introduce what I would have had be the center of the conflict between Team Cap and Team Iron Man. In the same fashion that Mysterio exposes Spider-Man's identity at the end of Far From Home, I think Zemo should be revealing to the world at large that Bucky Barnes killed Howard Stark. I don't understand how this wasn't the central conflict of this film. It feels so tacked on at the end, and of course you get that iconic fight scene at the very end of the movie, but there's so much more to this that I feel like was just left kind of unpacked. One of the most crushing moments I've ever seen in any superhero movie, not just limited to Marvel, is when Tony finds out that Cap had betrayed him by not telling him that Bucky had killed his father. It's such an awesome scene and probably the one that sticks with me the most from this entire movie. Now, in this reimagination, I think once Iron Man finds out that Cap had lied to him, he essentially just expels him from the Avengers. He kicks him out of the compound and essentially says what he says in the original movie, which is, "I thought you were my friend, how could you do this to me?" And this is the start of the split between Team Cap and Team Iron Man. Some of the Avengers, of course, feel Tony is wrong for not at least hearing Cap out and letting him explain himself for hiding that. But the other Avengers are appalled that Cap could hide that truth for so long. Then we introduce the Sokovia Accords. Tony and the rest of Team Iron Man start to think about how the unchecked power of the Avengers really is dangerous. They think back on Sokovia, they think back on Ultron, they think of all the destruction they've caused amidst all the good they've done. Then the Avengers who will become Team Cap start to think about how Hydra had just infiltrated the government, and they begin to wonder if the Avengers could be weaponized to inflict more pain than do good. I want scenes of people actually talking in this movie. No quips, no snark, just real people talking about something actually important for even just a few minutes. The Avengers collectively quell their doubts and go to sign the Sokovia Accords. Little do they know, as this split's been forming, we've seen small tidbits of Zemo finding Bucky Barnes. I can't believe this didn't happen in the actual movie. I felt like it was a layup for Zemo to find Bucky and activate him so that he would carry out that attack at the UN meeting. And that's exactly what would happen in this reimagination. The attack occurs and Black Panther's father dies as he does in the original movie. What the Avengers don't know is that Cap is also there outside the UN meeting just watching. When he sees the explosion and sees that it was Bucky who carried it out, he chases Bucky down. But instead of taking him to the authorities, Cap aids him and helps get him to safety. And this is where the true rift occurs. The members of Team Cap know that there has to be more to this than meets the eye. They know that Cap wouldn't just blatantly betray everybody for one friend. And the rest of the members of Team Cap help Bucky escape as well as Team Iron Man tries to hunt them down. Now we get a lot of the same scenes where Team Cap and Team Iron Man start finding the rest of their respective Avenger squads, I guess. I think this was a perfect time to introduce Spider-Man. It's a perfect time to introduce Ant-Man to the MCU, and the WandaVision conflict is also pretty good here. Team Cap starts to investigate the attack at the UN, and Bucky is starting to recover and snapping out of that weird trance he goes into, and eventually they trace all of this madness back to Helmut Zemo. They realized that Zemo had orchestrated this entire plot, including leaking that footage to the news of Bucky killing Howard Stark. And Team Cap knows that they have to move quickly to bring Zemo to justice. While Team Cap is investigating that, Team Iron Man is trying to locate Team Cap. They're able to track down Team Cap and corner them at the airport as they do in the original. And this is where I would make the biggest change to this entire movie, I think. One of my biggest issues at large with the MCU as a whole is that there aren't enough consequences for people's actions. This airport fight is the perfect time to not only solidify that the Avengers will not be who they once were when Thanos arrives, but it's also a chance to establish stakes. That's right, someone has to die. And it has to be someone with actual weight too, that people really care about. For me, I think that has to be Black Widow. If Natasha dies, this group is permanently fractured. I can seriously picture it. Vision gets distracted, but everyone's still on the ground. Instead of shooting Rhodey out of the air, he shoots Black Widow straight through the heart on a misfire. Team Cap pauses to take in what's happened for a moment before continuing to leave to find Zemo. Meanwhile, Team Iron Man is just left completely shell-shocked at what's just occurred. When Team Cap does reach Zemo, I think it's an obvious opportunity to have them fight those other Winter Soldiers. I was so disappointed by that. It kind of felt like the Knights of Ren for me. Like they're there and they have the potential to be so cool, and instead they either just aren't used at all or come across disappointing. I think that a battle between Team Cap and the Winter Soldiers would be so cool to see, especially Bucky squaring off against some of them. It feels like such a missed opportunity. I also do want T'Challa to track them down and still have that moment with Zemo heart to heart. That is another moment in this movie that I do really appreciate it. I feel like it adds so much depth to T'Challa as a character. The Winter Soldiers are defeated, Zemo's taken to prison, and we are ready for Infinity War. This group is completely fractured. And that's about it on my reimagining of Captain America Civil War. I am really excited to see how Marvel approaches Captain America Brave New World. I think there is an interesting concept for that movie there. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to drop a thumbs up. Also, let me know what you think about Captain America 4 down in the comments below. I am really excited to see it. And thanks so much for watching. I appreciate your time, and I hope you enjoy Cap 4.